The Brass Citadel, the pinnacle and capital, as it were, of the Blood God's domain within the Realm of Chaos. Khorne's realm is the largest of the Chaos Gods, and marred with unending war. With the gameplay teaser released from Creative Assembly showcasing the mighty warriors of Kislev battling it out in a land that looks like the Realm of Chaos against the Servants of Khorne, I think it's only right that we dive into some lore for Total War Warhammer 3. There is plenty to talk about and reveal on May 13th, so we'll have to wait until then to get into some of the juicier stuff, but in the meantime, I wanted to do some lore leading up to the reveal. And what better way than to talk about the god of battle and lord of epic guitar solos, Khorne and his Brass Citadel. I'm going to be pulling mainly from entries in the 7th and 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Army books for the Demons of Chaos, and we will also be covering the Realms of Chaos as a whole through a series of videos as we discover more about how Creative Assembly intends to implement this into Warhammer 3. Speaking of, if you have not yet pre-ordered Warhammer 3, please feel free to use the link in my description to my Nexus storefront. They get Steam keys directly from the developer, and it's a great way to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, if you're looking forward to that May 13th reveal and some future lore and speculation for Warhammer 3, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, then hit that little bell icon. I can't tell you how much that goes a long way to supporting any content creator you watch. But let's dive in on the lore of the Brass Citadel in the Realm of Khorne. And still I fell, driven down by fetid winds, towards a wall of deepest red and blackened iron. I grew fearful, for this was the outer realm of Khorne, the blood god, and this wall his bastion about the inner lands. It now seemed to me that the stench of death broke my fall, and I flew onwards towards fresh visions of despair. And then ahead I saw a stair, surrounded by pinnacles and columns and arches of blood and craven bone, circled by demons bound within black iron, brazen steps and hideous, shrieking mouths. All that could speak or gibber vomited forth the praises of Khorne, and shrieked out songs of death. The stair, its tread never built for mortal feet, climbed the dizzy heights, pausing at times before profane runes and stained sacrifice stones. Within the very fabric of the demon-thronged bastion were smaller landings, each of which could held a lofty and noble palace of our small world. The stair twisted and rippled on itself, its demons snarling their insane glee at its dreadful geometry. Still it climbed, ever upwards into the clouds of gore that circled overhead. I beheld the wastelands of Khorne beyond the bastion, soaked red with blood and stained with souls. All about, the demons battled one another, unheeding of fear or pain. The air was filled with the taste of blood, the stench of death, the terrible sound of eternal slaughter. That little lore blurb there was from the Liber Malefic in the 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy book for Chaos Demons, and it talks about the Bastion Stair. Now, the Bastion Stair, though, is not the Brass Citadel. The Bastion Stair is this large titanic wall that really surrounds the realm of Khorne. So I figure this is a really good way to kind of lead into this discussion about the Brass Citadel, because this would be the first thing that you would see upon entering the Realm of Khorne. Again, when we talk about the Bastion Stair and we look at the way that the 7th and 8th edition kind of lay out the overall look of Khorne's realm, we get something that is very similar here. And from what the actual book tells us here is Khorne's dominion is little more than leagues upon leagues of blasted wasteland, made ruddy by the blood spilt upon it. And this is different than what you get from the other Chaos Gods. The other Chaos Gods have these very intricate and interwoven realms that have, like, when you take a look at the Dark Prince's realm, there's like this massive Colosseum that surrounds, I'm not a Colosseum, like an amphitheater that surrounds like a like a actual tower erecting from the center of it. The land of the Plague Lord is a series of swamps and a bunch of stuff. Like when you get to the Realm of Sorcerers, it's a bunch of crystalline buildings. So it's every single one of these lands is very diverse and it's very different, except when we come to Khorne's, we get a very, like I said, desolate wasteland of death and destruction and war and blood and mayhem. When we talk about the Brass Citadel too, it starts to get particularly detailed. So we'd never really get a true representation of what any of the Chaos Gods actually look like. And that's intentional, right? They're trying to say that the Chaos Gods, they come and go, and their appearance is kind of at the whim of the perceiver. And it depends entirely on what is going on in that, and in the scenario in which the god decides to be personified. Like when you take a look at the entry for Skarbrand, we get what sounds almost like a larger bloodthirster and less so much like some sort of crazy different god. And when Skarbrand goes to swing his axe at Khorne, and he takes like a little chunk out of his armor, and it enrages Khorne, and Khorne grabs him by the throat, Skarbrand that is, and just devours all of his personality, so he's left with nothing but pure rage. It's really interesting, right? So it's like you get a very different representation of him depending upon who is talking about Khorne. And Khorne eventually tosses Skarbrand from the top of the Brass Citadel, and you get this very Lord of the Rings-esque Gandalf and the Balrog falling through for days and days on end, and that's what happens to Skarbrand. So even when we look at Skulltaker, another one of the larger characters in the Khorne kind of compendium, and to be exact, he's rather than being a bloodthirster, he's a bloodletter, the lesser demon of Khorne, and he's a champion of Khorne. And this individual goes around taking skulls and presents them before Khorne and his skull throne. So I think the Brass Citadel is a particularly interesting portion of Khorne's lore because like I said, it's the only portion of the land that actually has any identifying feature. For the most part, everything else, when you look at this picture, is just series of blasted mountains and volcanoes and stuff like that. You get a couple things like the Skull of the First or the Island of Endless Gore, but really the Brass Citadel is the only thing that stands out. And I think that makes for a lot of representation of Khorne's character himself. As we take a look at the 7th and 8th edition entries for the Skull Throne, really the biggest part of probably the most widespread portion of lore about Khorne is, skulls for the Skull Throne, right? We all think of that. And this representation here, the way they describe it here is Khorne himself dwells within a great vault at the black heart of the Citadel's central keep. 8 iron pillars vanish into the ebon gloom to shoulder the inconceivable weight of the throne room's ceiling. So even right there, we get this very massive, very huge, almost dwarf hold-esque construct. It's not just simply, hey, this is a cramped space, there's a bunch of skulls everywhere, and there's a guy with glowing eyes, like we see in a lot of artist renditions. It has a level of grandeur and a level of ornateness to it that is really interesting. It's very Baroque. Each pillar is inscribed with one of the commandments of Khorne. These edicts speak to the unholy virtues of rage, martial skill, and defiance. In the center of the room, the blood god sits upon a mighty throne of brass atop a vast mountain of skulls, each the grisly trophy of a champion victorious, or the remains of a champion defeated. And again, it creates, when you think about Khorne, it's really, there's a level of mindlessness, right? You think about Tzeentch and how Tzeentch is so cerebral and how there's a plan within a plan within a plan. And Slaanesh is really just about tweaking your nipples and saying, oh, I like that. And then Nurgle's about death and rebirth. And less so, like, plagues are a part of it, but Nurgle is really about death and rebirth. Khorne here, it's more about a twisted sense of rage-filled honor that is tied to martial skill. And I think that is really cool because one of the coolest portions of this little entry here was each pillar is inscribed with one of the commandments of Khorne. But what makes this so great is that you do get less of a mindlessness from this, right? You get a sort of direction for Khorne, that he does have some sort of twisted guiding compass, as it were, but something that really kind of tells you that the followers of Khorne, aspects of him still adhere to some form of honor or code. Khorne is customarily clad in ornate armor of black and brass. The blood god's body is broad and muscular, his visage that of a fierce and snarling dog with ravaged lips. When Khorne speaks, he does so in bellows of black rage, each guttural syllable igniting the air in tainted sparks. Upon Khorne's fingers are many brass rings, some blazoned with his own skull rune. Upon others are mounted the severed heads of lesser gods, or less fatal tokens of vanquished foes. What being would dare face the blood god in the arena of martial prowess remains a mystery, so the provenance of these other rings is unknown, lest they be tokens from the great battle from which creation sprang. At Khorne's side is a mighty double-handed sword. Legend tells that the drawing of this dolorous weapon is the harbinger of calamity, and that Khorne could split existence asunder with but a single stroke, were it his desire. Elsewhere in the Citadel, mighty armories are stocked with every weapon imaginable, yet for reasons long since forgotten to mortals, Khorne always favors this one sword. So, again, you get more of this picture of how Khorne kind of inhabits this massive brass citadel, and how the skull throne is, sure, he sits upon it, but there's also kind of more to this. And you almost get another set of imagery of a character who kind of sits on this throne, you know, head on hand, kind of looking almost bored. And of course he has his servants going about the land, exacting all sorts of examples of martial skill and bringing back these skulls and placing them at his feet. But it's almost like there's an imagery that he's waiting, right? He's waiting to draw this Dolorous blade to end, to start this grand calamity. And I think that's a really cool imagery, right? Where you get more of a passive god in what is a god that is extremely brutal and very aggressive, but this portrayal of him as being a little bit more, almost like, I kind of want to say something a little bit more Grecian, a little bit more removed. And we'll get into that a little bit right here now when we talk about Karnak. But at the foot of the throne, a carpet of splintered bone extends in all directions, the remains of those slain by the blood god's conquering champions. Under the Stygian shadow of this chamber's eaves lies a mighty anvil, where furnace demons forge weapons and armor for the blood god's favored followers. Great warriors and mighty war leaders who kill for that which they desire. Here also lurks the great hound Karnak, a massive three-headed demon beast who prowls the cavernous throne room. In the very direst of need, when his armies are overwhelmed and his citadel beset, Khorne rises from his throne, his armored footfalls shaking the realm of chaos to its core. So even right there, we get this notion that he doesn't really ever make his presence known to the realms, as it were, unless it's really at a dire circumstance. Okay, you know what? They're at my actual citadel gates. They're slamming upon the doors. Time for Big Daddy to come out. I mean, we read about Skarbrand and how he's responsible for destroying one of the first castles of Slaanesh, or one of the first citadels of Slaanesh. So that's not even Khorne that does it. It's a greater demon. So Khorne is so ass bad strong that he just doesn't need to worry about things until, oh, okay, you guys have let things get to this point. Now it's time for me to come finish what you guys have started. And I think that is a really kind of cool, calm confidence that you get from someone that is just so astronomically strong when it comes to hand-to-hand combat that he just doesn't care until it actually is at his doorstep. Because you get Tzeentch kind of interweaving his way into the skeins of fate and how he can really pull those strings. And you get Slaanesh directly influencing things with all these cultists, and you get a lot of influence into the mortal realms as well with Nurgle, right? With all these plagues and the plague armies. Khorne is just seen, for like I said, for probably the most aggressive god. He has such a passive-aggressive appearance. He's definitely leaving post-it notes on Tzeentch's dishwasher saying, you better empty this. But no, he definitely has this more passive approach, which I kind of think makes it scarier. He's not just bellowing, slamming his fists against the wall the entire time. He's just calm. So with an honor guard of bloodthirsters, each with the power of an army in its own right, the Lord of Battle unleashes his rage upon the foe, scattering the demons of his rivals with each sweep of his mighty blade and trampling their broken bodies underfoot. This willingness to take physical participation in the great game is what marks Khorne out from his fellow gods. Even so, such personal interventions are rare indeed, and so each calamitous occasion marks a turning of the tide in the wars of the gods. You gotta remember, in the realm of chaos, there's a constant war between the 4 gods, and each one has their own prime antithesis, but they still fight amongst each other. And it even says right here, you know, his willingness to take physical participation in the great game is what marks Khorne out from his fellow gods. The other ones are always pulling the strings from some other angle, right, from the shadows. And the very few times that Khorne ever does kind of sweep to the fore, it is with physical extreme ramifications. And I think that is such an awesome, dire contrast to the way that we get his cultists, his champions, his followers, his demons. They're all very aggressive and bloodthirsty, right? I mean, bloodthirster, bloodletter, you know, blood champion of Khorne. All these things are just built into the name. So it's a very cool dichotomy that the lore has built in between his portrayal and the way that his worshippers worship him, or at least personify that worship. And it's going to be interesting to see how they push this into Total War Warhammer 3. We know that there's going to be something having to do with the Chaos Realms, right? Even the people who have played the battle don't really know how that works. And Indy Pride said that perfectly in his video. We don't know, can we move through this world like we can a campaign map? And so that kind of begs the question, will there be persistent quote-unquote corruptions for each portion of the Chaos Realms? Do we go into the entirety of the Chaos Realms? The way I kind of envisioned it, and I've talked about this before in one of my other speculation videos on the subject, was kind of like Heroes of Might and Magic, right? Where in Heroes of Might and Magic, you have a little cave, you go in the cave, and there's an underworld, quote-unquote, that you kind of meander through, and it's just like the top world. It's just a shortcut from point A to point B. I wonder if the Realm of Chaos is going to be like that. You've got certain entry points, and okay, this enters you into the Blood God's domain, and this is just Khorne's portion of the Realm of Chaos. Or are you as Cathay, are you as Kislev going to be entering in and trying to conquer portions of the actual realm? And in it, like I was saying, do you have 4 different types of corruption to deal with? What would be really interesting is if this corruption led to persistent effects. Like, okay, maybe if you're dealing with the Realm of Khorne, the Blood God's domain, as it were, there's some sort of air, like the frenzied wind or the blood-curdling mist, something like that, right? Over the top and cheesy, like it's meant to be. But with that would cause on the battlefield, every single unit has frenzy, but also every single unit, once they hit 50%, they rampage or something like that. Something that makes fighting in the Realm of Chaos harder, more difficult, highly characteristic. And it's not just bound to, okay, well, I'm now fighting a battle in what looks to be the Realm of Chaos on a chaos-themed map against chaos demons. Have there be a little bit more to it where there is an extra challenge to fighting in that realm. And that's supposed to be hard, right? We don't see many incursions of mortals mounting campaigns into the Realm of Chaos. We see stuff like with individual characters, right? When we see Grimnir, who makes the massive exodus and march north to the Chaos Gates to try to go into that realm and do some duking it out. But we don't really see these massive campaigns going in. And logistically, moving an army from one location to another is going to be difficult. Moving it between mortal planes, going to be even more difficult, I would imagine. So add that little flavor in there. Make it so that there is harder combat to deal with. Like, okay, maybe if you're dealing with Nurgle, every single unit on the map is slowly losing health or something like that to a certain threshold. Maybe that's a little too much. But it'd be very interesting to see stuff like, okay, if you're in the realm of Tzeentch, everyone gets a boost to their winds of magic, including, of course, your enemy. And your overcast chance is reduced. Or maybe your overcast chance is increased. So, yeah, you can use all these winds, and it's kind of tempting to use that overcasted spell, but that's going to be a 75% chance to do a miscast. So that would be really cool if that's how the way they built it in. Some temptation in there because it is Tzeentch and he's trying to tempt you along the fate to use the winds of magic to dominate your enemies, and boom, you explode. Like stuff like that. So we'll start to explore more of these things as we hear more information from Creative Assembly on the way the Chaos Realms are going to be embodied in Total War Warhammer 3. And I plan fully to do a whole ton of speculation on a lot of the Realms of Chaos. We'll discuss the varying domains of the Chaos Gods. But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below if this is something you guys want to hear more about. I know that you all love to hear speculation, and I'm always about doing Warhammer lore, so I'd love to just put the two together like I've been doing for years. And let me know if you like the little narrative piece in the beginning. I was pretty against doing it, but I was convinced, hey, maybe just put it in, see how it goes. So we'll get your feedback, and we can go from there. But guys, as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that fun action. But have a good one, and take care.